Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to our Bible study. We are going through the topic of apologetics, which is all about how to defend your faith, how to give a reason for the hope that you have, and doing it with gentleness and with respect. And today, we are talking about evidence outside of the Bible that corroborates, or in other words, validates claims of the Bible when it comes to archaeological claims, when it comes to historical claims, and we're going to talk about different historians who have claimed outside of the Bible the veracity of the claims of the New Testament, and also archaeological evidence that points to the reliability, at least on a historical level, of what the Bible claims happened 2,000 years ago. So that's what we're talking about today in our apologetics Bible study. First of all, I want to ask a question. Has there ever been a time in your life when you didn't believe somebody, what they said, claim that they made, until that they could offer some outside support to corroborate what they said? Right? It's often easy to tell when someone's telling the truth when they're very quick to show you proof of what they did. Right? So, for example, if like someone's like, "Are you looking at something weird on your phone?" And you're like, "No, I'm not. Look," and they instantly show you corroborating evidence outside of their own verbal testimony to show that what they're saying is true. Okay. Um, has there been a time in your life when you've seen that? Today we're going to talk about what that looks like when it comes to the New Testament. Not only just taking the New Testament's claims for itself, but also saying, what are other people saying about this? And like we've been doing for the last few weeks, we're going to take this in the sense of a courtroom drama. And so the prosecution stands up and reads out their opening lines, which goes something like this: Your Honor, may well be fine that the Bible is considered true to the original eyewitness testimonies and the teachings of the apostles, something we talked about last week. But we cannot believe in Jesus just because, as the saying goes, the Bible tells me so. There's no credible evidence outside of the Bible to corroborate the life of Jesus. For example, the defense compared the New Testaments to the writings of Josephus and Tacitus and two other ancient authors, yet we find no mention of Jesus in these important secular historians. The Bible's a book of faith. It can't be scientifically proven. Therefore, we deny its use in these proceedings. Arising from the defense, the attorney steps up and says, Your Honor, the defense will agree with the prosecution that we should not look only to the Bible without checking it for overall reliability. There should be evidence outside the Bible that Jesus lived and was considered special by the people of the day, whether or not they believed in him. In fact, the prosecution is mistaken. There are actually evidence in both Josephus and Tacitus. Therefore, we hold that science, archaeology, and objective history will bear the evidence for the Bible, not against it. For example, take the historical evidence outside of the Bible for the existence of the biblical Jesus. Mentioned this already, but the historian Josephus was not a Christian. He was a secular Jewish historian, and he wrote one of his annals of history is called Antiquities. And in his work Antiquities, he mentions that James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ. Now, you would have to have a certain level of specificity. Yeah, there is probably a number of people named Yeshua, right? There's probably a number of people named James. And I don't know what the Hebrew name for that is off the top of my head. But you got, not only is there James and Jesus and their brothers, but then specifically people historically referred to this person as the Christ, which is the Greek term for anointed one, sent one, which is the Greek parallel to the Hebrew term Messiah. Okay, Jesus, brother of James, who is called Messiah, who is called Christ. And then further, Josephus mentions that he was put to death by the high priest Ananias, and the Sanhedrin, which was the council of Jewish elders. No scholar has been able to disprove this passage as anything other than original. Josephus wrote it, and he was a credible historian for his time. He's also, in a later passage, goes on to describe basic details about the life of Jesus, and those scholars feel that there's been some, pro-Christian additions made to it. It seems clear that he at least did write about Jesus, and that that Jesus established a significant following. Historically, this is corroborating evidence outside of the claims of the New Testament. Further, you have an author named Tacitus. In 115 AD, he stated that the Roman Emperor Nero persecuted Christians. Now, here's an interesting reason why. Nero set a fire to Rome in AD 64. And then he blamed Christians for it, and then went ahead and persecuted these followers of Christ. In fact, the term Roman candle comes from this time period, when Nero would actually tie Christians to a light pole, or not a light pole because they didn't have it, but like to a big pole, and then light them on fire to light up his backyard activities. These are Roman candles. And Nero got away with it because he blamed the Christians for the fire that devastated Rome in AD 64. Now, Tacitus mentions this in AD 115. He mentions that Christians got their origin from Christ, who was executed by Pontius Pilate, and that they practiced a most mischievous superstition. Obviously, Tacitus is not a Christian. In fact, he was very much against Christianity. He was, at the very least, an atheist. And so he claims that Christians were practicing a most mischievous superstition. And this was the superstition: their belief in the resurrection of a man named Jesus Christ. Right? This confirms, at least from an unsympathetic source, some of the basic info about the early church, that it had spread on the basis of the claim of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, whether or not that happened is something we'll deal with later. But the fact of the matter is, there was a person named Jesus Christ who had a following, which was later referred to as Christianity. You cannot deny this historical fact. Okay. Further, Pliny the Younger, AD 111. Okay. He was a Roman provincial governor. He wrote to Emperor Trajan. Pliny the Younger writing a letter to Emperor Trajan, who corroborated the beliefs of early Christians. In other words, he's referring to Christians chanting to Christ as if to God, whom he persecuted and tortured. Okay, again, very against Christianity, but claims, historically, we know Pliny the Younger to be a historical figure. He's written about in other areas. He's writing to Trajan, Emperor Trajan of Rome, and saying, these guys keep going on, like claiming that Jesus Christ was God. They're like chanting to him, like early worship songs. And you can't deny historically that there is this evidence that people were following Christ and claiming him to be God based on his resurrection from the dead. There's at least a following developed because of that. We'll go further. Two other ancient authors, Thales and Phlegon, made references to the day the world went dark and the sun was hidden at noon and the earth quaked. And they dated it at 33 AD. 33 AD. Do you remember anything else that happened 33 AD? There was a man who was hung on a cross for claiming to be God. During that time, 33 AD, Jesus of Nazareth crucified on the cross. This is Mark chapter 15. Right? Verses 21 through 32 claim that Jesus is on the cross, he's dying, and verse 33 says, when the 6th hour had come, which is essentially noon, when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. 3 hours of darkness The sun is covered. It looks like nighttime in the middle of the day. And at the ninth hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means in Hebrew, my God, why have you forsaken me? This event would have been noticeable, right, by people who follow Jesus or not. This event, I mean, if something was happening 100 miles away, and it caused divine interaction on planet Earth, one of which consequences, or one of the side effects of which is the sun being darkened. Do you think that I would experience that even 100 miles away? I wouldn't even have to have any knowledge of what's going on, however far away. But when the sun is darkened, I can't see either. This is a very noticeable event, and so Phlegon and Thales both talk about that. They don't even write about the Gospels or about Christianity, but they say 33 A.D. this thing happened, and it was kind of interesting. All right, so you have historical corroboration in other historical documents that we look to for learning about the ancient Near Eastern world, and so these are things that corroborate claims of Christianity. Let's go further. Let's even just say, what kind of corroboration is there among some of the other leading world religions? Historical evidence corroborating some of these other world religions. So take Zoroastrianism, for example. Some information, there's a little bit, some of the main texts of Zoroastrianism, there's some information from 1000 BC, but most Zoroastrian scripture was not written until the 3rd century AD, which is interesting, claiming it's a religion that comes from much further in the past. The most popular biography even of Zoroaster wasn't written until 1278 AD, which is at the very least 2,200 years after the claim of when Zoroaster lived. And so you don't even have a whole lot of historical documentation of what's going on in the time frame of when Zoroaster lived, let alone outside sources speaking about it. Okay, let's go to Buddha. Ooh, Buddhism. Okay, now the Buddha lived in the 6th century BC, but Buddhist scriptures, and even the first biography of Buddha, the oldest copy we have of biographical information about Buddha, was not put into writing until after Christ, like at least 600 years later. That's a whole lot of time between when history claims this man lived and anything else written about him, let alone from his followers, but even from outside sources. Okay, let's take Muhammad. Okay, the Prophet Muhammad of Islam lived from AD 570 to AD 632. And his sayings, obviously, are preserved in the Quran. But even the biographical information written about Muhammad, the oldest that we have from that even, is from AD 767. Okay? So you at least have the span of 130 years without any, the oldest information we have that are claiming his existence or anything that was related to when he lived. Like, we don't have authors from the same time period as Muhammad writing about Muhammad. None of that stuff came until at least 130 years later. Okay? And you have this in real time with Jesus and with Christianity. People who lived at the same time period, who are respected historians that have no interest in Christianity, also claiming, corroborating many of the events of the New Testament at the same time period, writing at the same time period that Jesus was living and then that the New Testament was being written. Okay? So at the very least, you have to say that what he's doing, what the New Testament is claiming, what the New Testament is claiming as far as the events that happened, Now, their interpretation of the events we'll get to again later, but at least as far as the events that happened, there's more corroboration of that in the New Testament than there is of any other of the leading world religions. Okay, let's take corroborations from within the Christian faith. St. Paul's epistles confirm much of what is said and believed about Christ in the Gospels, and were written before the Gospels were written. Okay, it shows a well-established, at the very least, this shows a well-established belief in worship of Jesus of Nazareth as the Son of God in the early church. You take also the Apostolic Fathers, early Christian writers and saints provide a lot of information, important information about the first beliefs and teachings about Jesus. For example, you got Saint Ignatius of Antioch, who was martyred before 117 A.D. You got Saint Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, Epistles of Barnabas, the colleague of Paul. You have Clement of Rome, one of the early bishops there, and all of these people writing within 100 years, within 100 years of the claims of Christianity, and then not only that, but then being martyred for it. Now that's going to be significant. We'll get to that later. But the fact that they're not only writing about significant claims of Christianity, but within the same time period of that, and not being Bible writers. Okay, these are just early Christian leaders, and that's historical corroboration of the claims of the New Testament. Not only that, then many of them went on to be persecuted or even went to their deaths for these claims. You don't do that if you're knowingly lying, if you're fabricating a tale on purpose. Okay, so there's a lot of significant historical corroboration writing about the claims of the New Testament. Before we continue on, what I want you to do is hit pause on this video, and if you're with a group of people right now, pause to chat about these questions. All right, so let's move on beyond just history. Let's talk about archaeology. Now, I don't have the time to go into the depth and the wealth of archaeological corroboration of New Testament claims, but we're going to get to a few of these. The first thing you need to consider is what archaeology can and cannot verify. For instance, it can verify certain details, but it can't verify what people said or thought. It can verify whether a place that is described actually existed, or if certain practices or technologies were in use. Archaeology can uncover that. It should also be able to verify if certain historical figures actually existed, such as Pontius Pilate in the New Testament. Right? Previously, scholars held that if an author made mistakes about basic historical facts and figures, then their whole story could not be trusted. Some pointed to certain examples in the Gospels as proof that they were unreliable. However, here's the point. Improved and advanced scientific research since then has actually shown that in all those cases that were previously referred to, the Gospel writer was correct about his present, and that we, with our limited knowledge of the past, was not fully aware of the truth at the time. Okay? For instance, some believed that John, the entirety of the book of John, was wrong because he claims certain historical and archaeological locations, geographies that never existed. And so at the time, writers go, oh, well, he couldn't possibly have been correct if he got this wrong. And then here's an interesting detail. This was the one they used, John chapter 15. Or I'm sorry, John chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. There we go, that's better. John 5, 1 through 15. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades, 5 porticos, or porches, essentially. And then he goes on to talk about how there was this pool, and I've been there. I've literally been to this exact geographical location that scholars claimed never existed. Now, it's currently still, there's more around the area that's being uncovered by archaeologists. So there's constantly people there who are digging in, but I've stood in the pool of Bethesda, and at the time, it was filled with water, and the text claims that the Spirit moved in the water, and that the first person into the water when that happened would be healed of whatever they were doing. And then there's this guy who'd been there for a very long time, 38 years. And he'd literally been laying by this pool for 38. I'm not even 38 years old, like 38 years, and he never got into the water, but constantly was hoping to be brought to the water. And then Jesus walks by and says, "Hey, do you want to be well?" And he heals him. And skeptics previously were saying, well, that couldn't have happened because there's no pool with 5 porches around it, 5 porticles, 5 roofed colonnades, and now history and archaeology are, agreeing with each other, saying, no, that this actually is a real place, and I've actually stood there. Okay, so that's the pool of Bethesda. There's been many others, archaeological claims of the New Testament that were previously doubted and now have been verified by current archaeology. Let's take John chapter 9, for example. John chapter 9, verse 7. Jesus says to a man who was born blind, verse 6. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, he made mud with saliva, and he put it on the guy's eyes. Strange. But then he says to him, now that I've done this, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back. Again, another miracle that is geographically tied to a location, the pool of Siloam. Previously doubted, historically and archaeologically now verified. John chapter 4, verse 14. Verse 13, Jesus says to the woman at the well, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. And the water that I give him will become a spring of water welling up into him eternal life. And they were standing at a well, referred to in the New Testament as Jacob's well. Okay? Again, another significant detail in the New Testament, because this is a spot where Jesus himself claims to be the Messiah, which, according to the Old Testament, is God. God sent in the flesh. The Old Testament predicts this. And so to a Jewish audience, someone who is half Jew, half Gentile, grew up in the town of Samaritans, very familiar with messianic claims. She knows exactly what Jesus is saying. Jesus says, "I'm God," and he does it at Jacob's well, which was previously said, yeah, sure, that's fable. No one really, and now archaeologically has been verified again. Let's take John chapter 19. John chapter 19, verse 13. Jesus is about to be crucified. He's been brought to Pilate by the Jewish leaders who claim this guy needs to die because he claims to be God. Verse 12, from then on Pilate sought to release him because Pilate's wife had a dream saying, "Have nothing to do with this man, Jesus." Pilate's wife tells Pilate's now scared of Jesus. He says, I want to release him. The Jews say, if you release him, you're not a friend of Caesar. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar, referring to Jesus. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement. And in Aramaic, it was called Gabbatha. Okay. This is near a gate called the Haffa Gate. Okay. The Haffa Gate, again, I've been here. I stood there when I toured Israel. It's a real place. It's a real thing that historians previously would say, no, this isn't a real thing. Therefore, Jesus could not have been delivered up to be crucified at this point. He didn't claim to be God, and therefore he wasn't delivered up to be crucified because he claimed to be God. And now some of these claims are being verified historically. Okay, let's keep going. I got a few more. Luke chapter 3. Luke chapter 3, verse 1. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, and Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, and his brother Philip being tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and here it is, Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene. Interestingly enough, this is a historical figure that, up till a few hundred years ago, no one thought this guy ever existed. There's no Abilene, there's no Lysanias or Lysanias or however you want to say it. And then archaeology discovered writings with his name on it connecting him to Abilene. Okay, let's take Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17, and we're going to refer to a specific government office. Okay, a government office that previously no one thought actually was a real office. Okay, Acts chapter 17, verse 6. And when they could not find him, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city officials. And the word for city officials is politarchs. Politarchs. There were city officials called politarchs that people are like, that's not a real thing. You just, kind of made that up. It's a fake office. Until, again, writings about men in the city named in offices called politarchs. Okay, so those are a few things. Let's take some long-standing puzzles of the Gospels. Like, these are things that actually were challenged early on and have been puzzles historically and archaeologically for a long time. The Roman census. Okay, this is significant because you're now talking about things that would corroborate the story of the virgin birth, which is a significant miraculous detail in the New Testament. Okay, Luke chapter 2, right? Luke chapter 2, everybody needs to go back to their town of origin that their family came from and be registered to take a census. Okay, Luke chapter 2 claims, Luke 2, verse 1, in those days a decree went out from Caesar, the head of the Roman Empire, Caesar Augustus, that all the world would be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to their towns to be registered. And Joseph went from Galilee to the town of Nazareth, to Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was the house of lineage of David. Notice all the historical and archaeological and geographical statements here, right? Where they went, who they were connected to, their lineage, all this kind of stuff. Significant things to be able to corroborate, to say, no, these people were connected to these people, and there's history to prove it. To be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. Anyways, many scholars believe this event didn't happen because there was nothing archaeologically claiming this ever happened other than the New Testament. Until this was independently confirmed outside of the New Testament in a piece of Egyptian parchment in AD 104. Okay, so you got within 104 years after this event happens. And then there have been names who've been disputed, like Herod. Like, was that ever a real guy? Was that ever a real office? And again, also been confirmed by the examination of coins and currency printed with these specific rulers' names on them. Okay, so you get the Roman census, and those who carried it out have been archaeologically and historically corroborated. Let's also take the town of Nazareth. Again, massive to state this existed because Jesus of Nazareth, history names him as Jesus who is called the Christ, Jesus of Nazareth. Was this a real place? Did it actually exist? Especially, did it exist in the time of Christ? Some have doubted, and it would be a significant doubt. That being said, tombs excavated at the site and dated to the 1st century, the century Jesus lived in, as well as records of priestly assignments, confirm Nazareth's existence, not only existence, but existence in the time of Jesus as a Jewish settlement. Okay, small little town, not highly respected, small Jewish settlement. Jesus grew up there. Okay. Um, a humongous one: the slaughter of innocent kids. Right. Remember in Matthew chapter 2, verses 16 to 18, Herod, scared of being deposed as king, when the wise men come and say, "Hey, we're here to worship the king, and it's not you." Herod tries to prevent Jesus' existence from ever being known, from ever happening, right? Just wipe out all the babies 2 years old and younger. How could such a tragedy be so unnoticed by other historical sources? That's been a big question for a long time. It's a question of massive scale. Because if that didn't happen, then the events surrounding the life of Jesus could then very easily be called into question. Bethlehem would have been a small village with relatively few children, and the slaughter of its innocent children by a bloodthirsty ruler such as Herod would not be noticed, unfortunately. Why? Here's why. You've got Herod, and this is historically true about him. Writers outside of the New Testament write about Herod as a bloodthirsty, insecure egomaniac. Killed members of his own family because he was scared they were trying to depose him. This was his regular practice. So across the board, it's independently verified that Herod did this as a regular practice to avoid deposition. So there were many larger towns than Nazareth that would have reported something like this and have. And it's maybe fairly understandable why you wouldn't hear about something coming out of Nazareth writing about it, because it was a small little settlement, unnoticed on a socioeconomic scale at the time. And so you have actually an understanding of this definitely could have happened. It's not outside of the character of Herod. It's not surprising to hear about this coming from a guy like this based on what we know about him historically. And it's also not surprising that we don't hear about it specifically in relation to Nazareth because of the small scale and the insignificance relatively to its time that Nazareth held at the time. Okay, that's a lot. We talked about this event surrounding the birth of Jesus, where he grew up, the Roman census, right? You got city officials. Did they exist? A certain person, did he exist? Lysanias of the Tetrarch of Abilene. You got locations like Jacob's Well and the pavement of Half a Gate and the Pool of Siloam and the Pool of Bethesda and so on and so forth. Archaeologically, and again, I didn't get to everything. There's a lot more. But there's an abundance of archaeological corroboration of the claims of the New Testament. The stuff actually happened. And I would say even further, the stuff that we have yet to archaeologically corroborate doesn't mean it's not there. And doesn't mean it didn't happen. Because continually, unlike any other religion, we're consistently discovering. Archaeological corroboration. And here's an interesting thing. You know who has the best archaeological school in the entire world? BYU, Brigham Young University. Okay, the specific university training Mormons. Okay, why do they have such a good archaeology school? Because they're constantly on the hunt for archaeological corroboration of the Book of Mormon. The reason they're so advanced is because they keep going, they keep pushing for something they have yet to find. Is archaeological corroboration of the Book of Mormon. You take any other world religion, pales in comparison to the abundance of corroboration that archaeology and also history gives to the claims of the New Testament. The defense rises up to say the New Testament is worthy of use when it comes to its stated claims about Jesus of Nazareth, who is called the Christ, worshipped as the Messiah. At this time, the court is adjourned for further discussion. Continue on in your discussion groups, and we look forward to chatting again with you next week.